Evelyn Hart did not scream when the rider hit the dirt. She did not move when blood ran across the floorboards and touched the toe of her boot. She only stood there with the shotgun tight in both hands, her breath coming hard, staring at the man who had kicked in the saloon door and laughed when he saw only a woman behind the bar. A minute earlier he had called her a widow in waiting. Then he had reached for his pistol. Now he was flat on his back with half his chest torn open, his grin gone, his eyes wide at the surprise of dying. The three men at the card table had gone silent. Big Sam Rourke, who owned the saloon, slowly set down his glass and looked at her like he had never seen her before. Evelyn swallowed once and said the only thing that came to her lips. "Tell Sheriff Boone," this one drew first. She set the shotgun down before her hands gave her away. Her fingers were shaking so badly, she nearly dropped the next bottle she reached for. The dead outlaw on the floor had worn the mark she had not seen in nearly 3 years, a black carrion bird burned into the leather on his vest. That mark had once been on the men who killed her family outside Dry Willow Creek. She had dreamed of this moment so many times that she thought it would feel like triumph. It did not. It felt like old pain waking up hungry, and when the stranger in the corner rose from his chair and looked from the corpse to Evelyn with those cold gray eyes, she knew the day had only begun. The room breathed again in small, frightened sounds. One man muttered a prayer. Another slipped out the side door to fetch the law. Sam came around the bar, careful not to touch her too soon, as if she were a horse fresh from a gun blast. He was a broad man with a bent nose and a voice like gravel, but there was more kindness in him than most in Red Hollow. "You all right, girl?" he asked. Evelyn gave a short nod she did not mean. She was 26 years old, yet in that moment she felt 12, back in a dark cellar with both hands over her mouth, listening to her mother cry out above her. She pushed the memory down so hard it made her jaw ache. "I am now," she said. It was a lie, and Sam knew it, but he let it pass. The stranger stepped closer only after the room had cleared enough to give him space. He moved like a man who never wasted a step. Tall, spare, dark coat powdered with trail dust, 2 Colts low on his hips, nothing flashy anywhere on him. Even the scar near his chin looked old and practical. "You know that mark," he said, glancing at the dead man's vest. His voice was calm, almost too calm, and carried the dry sound of Texas. Evelyn wiped her palms on her skirt and met his eyes. "I know what men like him do." The stranger crouched beside the body, turned the dead man's shoulder, and studied the brand with no change in his face. "Carrion riders," he said, "or one of their spill-off crews, mean enough to kill children, lazy enough to brag with a mark." He stood and looked at her again. Did he say anything before he pulled? Evelyn hesitated. Then she answered because something in him told her he would hear a lie. "He asked if I was the Hart girl." Sheriff Amos Boone arrived in a rush, red-faced and sweating through his vest, with 2 deputies at his back and fear already in his eyes. He had worn a badge for 20 years, but the badge had grown smaller on him with time. He took one look at the body and cursed under his breath. Not again. That was what bothered Evelyn most. Not shock, not anger, weariness. As if another dead outlaw in another small town was just another board to nail over a broken window. Boone took statements, though half the men in the room had suddenly remembered they had seen nothing. The stranger gave his name as Cole Mercer. Passing through, he said, had no quarrel with the dead man. Evelyn said only what was needed. The outlaw had come in drunk, cruel, and sure of himself. He had reached, she had fired. Boone could not fault that, and yet he kept looking at the brand on the vest as if it might rise from the dead and follow him home. When the body was dragged out, the room emptied fast. No one wanted to be in the same place as that mark. Evelyn cleaned the blood herself. Sam tried to take the rag from her twice. She refused him twice. She scrubbed until the boards were wet and pale, and still she could see the stain in her mind. Cole Mercer stayed where he was, one shoulder against the post near the bar, drinking coffee gone cold. He did not crowd her. He did not offer pity. When she straightened at last, breathing hard, he said, "Who in your family did they take?" Her head snapped toward him. Sam muttered Mercer, but Evelyn held up a hand. "My father, my mother, my little brother. The words came flat now. They had lived inside her long enough to lose shape. South of Dry Willow, 3 springs back. Cole lowered his cup. I heard of that place. A lot of folk heard of it, she said. No one did a damn thing. Boone returned an hour later with news no one wanted. A freight wagon had been found burned out 9 miles north. The Givens family was dead. Husband, wife, and 2 sons. Same bird mark on the sideboard. Evelyn felt the room tilt for a moment. The carrion riders had never come this close to Red Hollow before. Sam swore and crossed himself. Boone took off his hat and rubbed a hand over his thin hair. I'm calling a posse. Cole gave a single, short shake of his head. If you ride fast and loud, you'll ride into a trap. Boone bristled. And if we sit here, more families die. Both can be true, Cole said. There was no heat in his voice, which somehow made it harder. Men like these leave bait. They know grief makes people stupid. Evelyn saw Boone's shame land clean because the words were true. She also saw something else in Cole, not hardness alone, experience. The kind earned in places where mistakes were buried deep. After the sheriff left to gather men, Evelyn went out the back door and walked without knowing she had started. Her feet took her to the cemetery at the edge of town. 3 plain crosses waited there under a hard white sky, though her family was buried 100 miles away. These were only markers she had made for herself because grief needed somewhere to go. She stood over them and tried to pray. Nothing came. A boot scraped behind her. She knew before turning who it would be. Cole kept a respectful distance, hat in hand, his gray eyes on the empty ground beyond the graves. You going to tell me to let it go? She asked. No, good. He nodded once, because you won't. The bluntness of it almost made her smile, almost. Then what are you doing here? He looked out toward the northern ridge, trying to decide whether I'm passing through or riding toward trouble. Trouble's already here. I noticed. He fell silent for a beat. The dead man in the saloon knew your name. That means this isn't chance. That thought had already found her, but hearing it aloud made her blood run cold. You think they came for me? I think someone sent him to see if Evelyn Hart still lives in Red Hollow and whether she's frightened enough to run. He met her eyes. Are you? She hated the question because it demanded truth. Yes, she said. I've been frightened every day for 3 years. He studied her, and for the first time his expression shifted. Not softer, just more human. Fear isn't shameful, he said. Staying on your knees is. The words landed hard, too hard, easy for a man with 2 guns to say. He gave a humorless half-smile. You think the guns are why I'm standing, aren't they? No, the guns just help. He looked away then toward the ridge again. What keeps a person up is deciding something matters more than their fear. Boone rode out at dusk with 11 men. Sam stood on the porch and watched them go as if counting which faces might not return. Cole had saddled his bay but had not yet mounted. Evelyn came down the steps with her father's revolver at her hip and a bedroll under one arm. Cole saw both and cursed under his breath. No, she kept walking. You don't get to tell me no. This is not a trail ride. I know exactly what it is. Sam caught her elbow. Evie, don't. She turned to him with tears so angry they never had time to fall. I was hidden once while they killed my family. I won't hide again. Sam's grip loosened. He had no answer for that because none existed. Cole stepped in front of her close enough that she could smell leather, horse, and the faint smoke of the room they had both left behind. Can you shoot straight when someone is firing back? He asked. Yes. Can you obey when I say drop, run, or stay put? Depends if you're right. A flicker passed through his face. It might have been irritation. It might have been respect. That answer alone says you should stay. She lifted her chin. And yet I'm riding. He stared at her for a long second. Then he took the bedroll from her hand, lashed it to her saddle, and said, Stay close to me and do exactly what I say until you earn the right to argue. Sam made a rough sound in his throat. Mercer, if she gets hurt. Cole swung into the saddle. If she stays here and they came for her, she gets hurt anyway. He looked down at Evelyn. Mount up. She did, heart hammering so hard it hurt. Boone's posse was already a dark line in the distance, heading north into red evening light. Cole turned his bay toward a narrower cut in the hills, not following the sheriff's trail but angling away from it. Evelyn frowned. That's not the road. No, he said. It's the smarter way. She looked once back at Red Hollow, at the saloon, the church, the small life she had worn like a borrowed dress. Then she faced the open land ahead. Somewhere beyond those ridges rode the men who had broken her life. Somewhere out there waited the answer to whether revenge would save her or finish what grief had started. She touched her horse with her heels and rode beside the stranger into the falling dark. Cole led her through a dry wash choked with mesquite and stone, keeping to the places where moonlight broke apart before it could show them plain. Evelyn had ridden these lands all her life, but under darkness they felt changed. Every rock looked like a crouched man. Every shadow felt like breath waiting to pounce. She kept Butter close behind Cole's bay and said nothing for the first mile because all her strength was tied up in holding steady. At last she whispered, "Where are we going?" He did not turn in the saddle. "Ahead of the sheriff if I can manage it. You think Boone's riding into a trap. I think men who butcher whole families and leave marks behind are not fools every hour of the day." His voice stayed low and even. They know what fear does to towns. They count on somebody coming after them hot and blind. Evelyn looked north where the land rose into black ridges. "Then why did you let him go?" "Because Boone was going whether I approved or not." He glanced back at her once. "Now I'm trying to keep him from dying for it." They reached high ground near midnight and tied the horses below a shelf of broken stone. Cole dropped to one knee and studied the valley ahead through a pair of field glasses pulled from his saddlebag. Firelight glimmered far below, small and yellow against the dark. Evelyn crouched beside him, her shoulder brushing his sleeve, and felt how still he became when he was working. It was not the stillness of peace. It was the stillness of a man turning himself into a weapon. He passed her the glasses. "Count slow." Her hands were steady enough now to lift them. The camp sharpened into view, 8 men around the fire, 2 more beyond the wagons, horses picketed under brush. And farther north, almost hidden where the land narrowed into a cleft, she saw movement again. More horses, more men, her stomach tightened. "There are 2 camps." "No," Cole said. "1 camp and 1 knife waiting behind it." He took back the glasses. "Boone will see those first 10 and think he's found his quarry. Then the rest will close the canyon mouth behind him." Evelyn swallowed. "We have to warn him." Cole was quiet for a moment. "Yes." The single word held weight because he had measured another choice first. They moved fast after that, slipping down the ridge on foot while the horses stayed hidden. Loose stone rolled under Evelyn's boots more than once, but Cole never reached for her unless he had to. He seemed to understand that she would rather fall than be handled like something fragile. They cut east through a narrow draw and came out above the sheriff's trail just as Boone and his men rode into the canyon floor below. Evelyn cupped her hands and shouted his name. The sound cracked across the rock. Every horse down there jerked. Boone wheeled in the saddle, startled, looking up toward her voice. For one blessed second she thought they had made it in time. Then a rifle shot split the dark from the ridge behind the posse. One of Boone's deputies pitched sideways out of the saddle, dead before he hit the ground. The canyon exploded. Muzzle flashes burst from both sides. Horses screamed and reared. Men shouted over one another, some trying to charge, some trying to turn back. Cole fired from beside Evelyn, calm as if at practice, not wasting a single shot. She drew her father's revolver and fired too, not at shapes but at the bright teeth of gunfire wherever she could find them. Someone below yelled for cover. Someone else prayed. Boone's horse went down hard and threw him clear. Evelyn saw him crawl behind a boulder and drag another man with him. The trap had closed. Cole grabbed her arm and pulled her lower as bullets smacked sparks off the stone above them. "Stay behind me." "No." The word came out before she could stop it. He shot her a look sharp as a slap. "Then stay alive." They worked their way along the upper ledge, firing down at the riders on the far rim. It was not glory. It was noise, dust, fear, and the ugly work of trying not to die before the next breath. Evelyn lost count of her shots. Once she saw a man rise with a long gun and knew by the line of him that Boone would die if no one stopped it. She fired without thinking. The rider spun and vanished backward into darkness. Her hand froze after the shot. Cole saw it. "You saved him," he said. "Nothing more." No praise, no comfort. Somehow that helped. A moment later he whistled sharp through his teeth, and Boone answered from below. Cole shouted directions, told them where the weaker side of the trap lay, told them to push west on his next shot. Boone obeyed him without argument. That alone told Evelyn how bad it was. When Cole gave the signal, the trapped men made their break. 3 horses burst through first, wild-eyed and half-mad. Boone and the survivors followed on foot behind them, firing as they ran. Cole's revolver spoke from the rim with hard, measured rhythm, driving heads down long enough for the posse to claw free of the canyon throat. Evelyn fired beside him until smoke burned her eyes. Then, as fast as it had begun, it ended. The hidden riders pulled back into the rocks rather than chase a fight that had gone wrong. Silence came in ragged pieces. Boone limped toward the draw with 4 men left standing. 2 more were hurt badly. 3 were dead in the canyon. Evelyn stared at the bodies below and felt the old emptiness creep in. She had come wanting revenge. Instead she had found the same thing the land always gave, men left in the dirt and families waiting to hear which names would not return. Boone sank against a rock and looked up at them with a face 20 years older than it had been at dusk. "You saved our hides." Cole reloaded as if the words did not matter. "You nearly fed them yours." Boone bowed his head once because there was no defense for that. He looked at Evelyn then, really looked, and saw the powder on her hands, the fixed set of her jaw, the fear she had swallowed. "You should have stayed in town." She surprised herself by laughing, one bitter sound in the dark. That seems to be everybody's favorite thought. Boone did not smile. "I lost 3 men tonight. You would have lost every one of them if we had not come." The words were harder than she meant, but she did not take them back. Boone let out a slow breath. "Fair enough." Cole crouched near one of the dead ambushers and cut loose a leather pouch from the man's belt. Inside were folded papers, a little money, and a page torn from some ledger. Cole held it near a lantern. Names, dates, parcel numbers. He frowned. Evelyn moved closer. She knew enough letters and numbers to follow a list, and what she saw made her skin go cold. The given's name was there. So was her own family name, written from 3 years back. Below both were 2 others she knew, the Barstows and the Crowley widow, both holding creek land north of Red Hollow. Boone stared over her shoulder. "What is this?" Cole's face had gone flat again, but now there was something dangerous under it. "This is not random killing." He tapped the page with one finger. "This is selection. Somebody is paying to clear families off specific land." Boone looked sick. For what? Evelyn thought of the dry years, the creek beds, the fights men had already had over a trickle of water. "Water rights," she said, "and grazing." Cole met her eyes, and for the first time there was open respect there. "Yes." He folded the paper and tucked it inside his coat. "Which means the carrion riders are not the top of this thing. They are only hired hands." Boone wanted to ride straight back to town. Cole agreed for once. The wounded would not make it otherwise, and dawn was already thinning the eastern edge of the sky. Evelyn walked beside her horse because her knees had gone weak at last and she did not trust them in the saddle. Cole slowed his pace to match hers without remark. After a while he said, "You did well back there." She kept her eyes ahead. "I killed a man tonight." "Yes." "And another in the saloon." "Yes." She waited for him to tell her it would sit easier tomorrow. Instead he said the truth. "The first one stay with you." She looked at him then. "How many stay with you?" He was silent long enough to answer without speaking. "Too many," she said quietly. He gave one small nod. By the time Red Hollow came into view, the sun had broken over the flats and turned the town gold in a way it did not deserve. People were already gathering at the edge of the street, counting horses, counting men, reading the news before anyone spoke it. Sam pushed through first and gripped Evelyn by both shoulders like he needed to feel bone and breath before he believed she was real. Boone called for the doctor. Wives rushed toward the wounded. Then the sheriff climbed the porch steps and held up a hand for silence. His voice shook only once when he named the dead. After that he grew steady again. Maybe grief can do that to a man. Maybe shame can too. When the murmurs broke loose, Cole stayed back in the shade beside the hitch rail, apart from the crowd, as if he had done his part and no more. Evelyn looked toward him and he looked back. Between them passed something new. Not trust yet, not fully, but the beginning of it. Later, when the bodies had been carried and the wounded laid out and the town had started to understand that death had come within inches of all of them, Boone asked Evelyn and Cole to meet him in the sheriff's office. The torn ledger page lay on the desk between them. Outside, Red Hollow still sounded like a town. Wagon wheels, voices, a dog barking in the heat. Inside, the room felt smaller than a grave. Boone put both hands on the desk and said, "If this goes where I think it does, somebody respectable is behind it." Cole leaned back in his chair, eyes half closed, as if resting, though Evelyn knew better now. Respectable men have started most ugly things in this country. Boone looked at Evelyn. "Miss Hart, if your name is on that list, you may be in more danger than before." She held his gaze. "Then I'm done waiting for danger to find me." Cole turned his head and studied her a moment. Dawn had shown her too much to herself to go back. The girl who had hidden in a cellar was gone. What stood in her place was not healed, not gentle, and not afraid to know what came next. She laid her palm flat on the page with her family name. "Tell me where to start," she said. By noon the town had buried its dead and started whispering names it had not dared say aloud before. Men who owned too much land. Men who made offers when widows were grieving. Men who smiled in church and counted profit in private. Boone sent for records from the land office and came back angrier than Evelyn had ever seen him. The Barstows, the Givens, her own family, the Crowley widow. All of them had held parcels along the same narrow stretch where Willow Run still cut through dry country and kept good grass alive. Men would kill for that kind of water. Men already had. Boone spread maps across his desk and stabbed a finger at the creek line. Somebody's gathering the whole run piece by piece. Cole stood at the window, one shoulder against the frame, watching the street while he listened. Not somebody. Somebody with money, patience, and enough reach to hire killers and buy silence. Evelyn folded her arms tight across herself. "Then we stop circling and name him." Boone looked at her, then at Cole, as if ashamed of how long it had taken him to get there. "There's one man buying hard in this county and the next," he said. "Elias Mercer." Cole's eyes narrowed, though the rest of him stayed still. The name meant nothing to Evelyn at first. Boone saw that and kept going. "Rail man, cattle investor, calls himself a builder of towns, owns banks in Fort Mason and half the freight sheds east of here, uses agents for most of his buying so he stays clean." He rubbed a hand over his face. "He sent men to me twice in the last year asking about abandoned claims near Willow Run, offered money for advance notice if more land came open." Evelyn felt her mouth go dry. "And you turned him down?" Boone did not answer right away. That was answer enough. "I turned him down the second time," he said at last. The room went still. Evelyn stared at him. "The second time." Boone flinched as if she had struck him. "The first time I thought it was only business. Men ask about land every day. I took the money and told myself it meant nothing." His voice was tired now, stripped bare. "Then the Barstows died, then your family. Then I understood what kind of notice he wanted." Evelyn rose so fast her chair scraped hard across the floor. "You let wolves count our doors." Boone stood too, shame burning in his face. "I know what I did." "Do you?" She snapped. "Because my mother died on the floor of our house while men you helped led killers to us." Cole moved before either of them quite knew it, stepping between the desk and her as calm as stone. He did not touch her. He only cut the line between them. "If you strike him now, you gain nothing." His voice was low, but it carried. Evelyn wanted to hate him for being right. Instead, she hated the tears that burned her eyes and refused to fall. Boone took the blow without defense. "I deserve worse," he said. Cole turned his head slightly, still keeping Evelyn in his near sight. "Do you want punishment now?" he asked her, "or proof that hangs the man paying for all of it?" The question was cruel in the way truth often is. She forced herself to breathe once, then again. "Proof." "Good." Cole stepped aside. Boone sank back into his chair like his bones had gone weak. "There's an agent in town," he said. "Not Mercer himself. A landman named Horace Pike. He keeps office over the general store and acts like he's only here to sort deeds and grazing disputes. But he sends telegrams twice a week east. and every family that died had spoken with him in the month before. Evelyn wiped at her face with the heel of one hand, angry even at that small sign of feeling. Then we start with Pike. They did not go at him head-on. That was Cole's rule, and this time Evelyn did not fight him on it. A frightened agent might burn papers or run. A clever one might smile and say nothing while sending word to the men who did the killing. So they watched instead. Through the long heat of afternoon, Cole took the alley behind the land office while Evelyn sat with sewing outside the boarding house where she could see Pike stare from across the street. Boone moved openly in town, doing his best to look like a sheriff who had learned nothing in the canyon. It was a poor act, but maybe fear makes a man look innocent when he means to. Pike came and went in a dark coat too fine for Red Hollow. He greeted people by name, tipped his hat to widows, patted children on the head. Twice Evelyn saw him stop in the middle of the boardwalk to speak with men who owned parcels along Willow Run. By sunset, she knew one thing for certain. Evil did not always ride in with mud on its boots. Sometimes it wore polished shoes and smiled kindly. Near dark, Pike finally left his office and walked toward the telegraph station. Cole appeared beside Evelyn so quietly she almost started. "He's sending tonight." She rose, smoothing her skirt. "Then we follow." They kept back as Pike paid the operator and wrote out his message. From the shadow beyond the window, Evelyn could not read the page, but she saw enough to know the man was careful. He folded the form once before passing it across. The operator tapped it out while Pike stood with his gloves in both hands, face expressionless. When he came back down the steps, Cole let him walk nearly half a block before slipping into the station. Evelyn followed. The operator, a thin young man with spectacles and bad nerves, looked from one to the other and swallowed hard when he saw Cole's hand near his gun. Boone had timed it well, entering right behind them with his badge plain in the lamplight. "Need to see the last message sent." The operator looked at Pike's copy book, then at Boone. "Sheriff, I ought not." Boone set both palms on the counter. "You ought." The message was brief and worse than either Evelyn or Boone had hoped. Target in place. Survivor active. Hunter confirmed. Advance timetable. Bring final papers by Friday. The signature was only HP, but there was no hiding what the words meant. Evelyn read it twice, stopping on Hunter confirmed. Her eyes lifted slowly to Cole. He took the paper and read it once. Nothing moved in his face, yet the room seemed to grow colder around him. Boone frowned. "Hunter." Evelyn looked between them. "What does that mean?" Cole folded the message and gave it back to Boone. "A name I used to work under." Boone stared. "Work doing what?" Cole met his gaze without blinking. "Exactly the sort of thing Mercer hires men to do." The answer hung there heavy and ugly. Evelyn felt her chest tighten, not with fear of him exactly, but with the sudden sense that a door had opened and something darker stood behind it. Outside, the night had come in full. The three of them stopped in the alley behind the station where lamplight from the street could not reach. Boone spoke first. "You knew Mercer." Cole's mouth thinned. "I knew the kind of men who handled jobs for him. During the war and after, there were always rich men needing ugly work done at a distance." He looked not at Boone but at the dirt between his boots. 3 years back I heard Mercer was buying more than rail line, buying water, grazing, anything a growing root would need, buying it cheap where he could, taking it where he could not. Evelyn heard the quiet change in his voice then. Guilt, not for her family exactly, but for a world he knew too well. "Did you work for him?" she asked. He answered at once. "No," then, after a beat. "But I've done jobs for men close enough to stand in the same room." Boone muttered a curse. Evelyn should have stepped back. A sensible woman would have. Instead she said, "Then you know how he thinks." Cole finally looked at her. "Yes, good." The word surprised even her as it left her mouth. "Then you're useful." Something changed in his eyes, not softness, maybe relief, maybe pain. Boone cleared his throat. "Friday," he said. "What happens Friday?" Evelyn took the telegram from him again. Final papers. Her mind moved over everything they had found. Families targeted, claims along the creek, an agent in town. "He's coming to close the buy." Boone nodded slowly. "Or sending somebody high enough to do it in person." Cole shook his head. Number Mercer will come himself if he believes the path is clear. Men like him like to stand where they've won. He glanced down the alley toward Pike's office, and Pike thinks he has won. He's sending word that the last real survivor is still here but active, which means Mercer will want to judge the risk with his own eyes. Boone looked sick again. Then we arrest Pike now. Cole's answer came hard, and warn Mercer before we have enough to hang him. No. So the plan formed there in the alley while crickets sang in the weeds and Red Hollow pretended to sleep. Boone would keep Pike unworried. Evelyn would visit the land office in the morning and let it be known she was tired of fear, tired of old grief, ready to sell her family's parcel for whatever price a respectable man might offer. She hated the idea the moment Cole spoke it. "You want me to play weak?" "No," he said. "I want you to bait a trap." Boone added, "If Pike thinks you're folding, he'll hurry." Evelyn folded the telegram and pushed it into Boone's hand. "Then I'll do it." Cole studied her for a long second. "He may threaten you. Let him. He may charm you." At that she almost smiled. "That seems less likely." A corner of Cole's mouth moved, gone before it could become a real smile. "Good." They walked back toward the saloon together, keeping to the quieter side of the street. Halfway there Evelyn slowed. The day had caught up with her all at once. The canyon, the dead, Boone's confession, Pike's telegram. Cole noticed, of course, he noticed everything. "You should sleep while you can," he said. "You say that like you plan to stay awake for all of us." "One of us should." She stopped under the shadow of the livery roof and turned to him. "When Pike wrote Hunter confirmed, he meant you." Cole said nothing. "Mercer knows you're here." Still he said nothing. She stepped closer because silence could be its own lie. "Why would that matter unless Mercer has reason to fear you?" Cole's eyes held hers at last. "Because men like Mercer remember the names of other men who survived doing filthy work. They remember which ones can ruin a careful plan." The answer was true but not full. She heard the part he left unsaid and knew he had not told her everything yet. She also knew she would not press it tonight. There was too much else ready to break. At the saloon door, Sam called her name from inside. Warm light spilled around him. Boone kept walking toward his office with the weight of a man carrying his own sins for the first time in years. Cole turned away too. "Where will you be?" she asked. "Near." "That is not an answer." He looked back over his shoulder. "It's the one you get." Then he was gone into the dark beyond the hitching posts. Evelyn watched until she could no longer make out his shape. Only then did she go inside. Tomorrow she would smile at a man who had marked her family for death. Tomorrow she would pretend to surrender the last thing her father had built with his hands. And somewhere beyond that, if luck and nerve held, Elias Mercer would come to Red Hollow believing he was about to close one more clean deal. Evelyn stood a moment with her hand on the doorframe and felt fear move through her like cold water. Then beneath it she felt something stronger. Not revenge. Not anymore. Purpose. Friday was coming, and for once she meant to be ready when evil rode in. Morning came with a heavy dust that seemed to hover, like a blanket of heat and anticipation. Red Hollow was already stirring, its dusty streets warming with the first rays of sunlight. Evelyn had not slept much. Instead, she sat by the small window in her room, tracing the outline of her father's homestead in her mind. 3 years had passed since it burned, but in her chest, it felt like yesterday. Every decision, every step she had taken had led her here. To this moment, standing at the edge of something she could not fully see yet. She had to play her part, and it started with the land office. Her boots clicked softly against the wooden floor as she stepped into the bustling morning of Red Hollow. Men from surrounding ranches were already lining up to file claims, to buy, to sell. The familiar smells of livestock and fresh bread filled the air, but Evelyn had no taste for it today. Her stomach twisted as she made her way across the street, her face a mask of calm as she passed the general store. The land office was just ahead, its sign swinging lazily in the wind, almost mocking her resolve. Inside, Horace Pike sat behind his desk, already scanning papers with that practiced air of a man who thought he knew everything. He glanced up as she entered, the faintest of smiles curling his lips. "Miss Bell," he said, his voice smooth like oil, "to what do I owe the pleasure?" To business, Evelyn replied evenly. I've decided to sell. Pike's eyebrows lifted slightly, his interest piqued. That's so. The land has value, sure, but it's no easy sell in these times. You sure you're ready to part with it? Evelyn held his gaze, steady and unwavering. I'm tired of fighting for something that doesn't belong to me anymore. Pike leaned back in his chair, fingers tapping idly on the desk. Can't say I blame you. These aren't easy times. He paused, eyes narrowing slightly. You know, I've had a few offers from folks eager to make a deal. I could offer you a fair price. A fair price, Miss Bell. His tone had shifted, more intimate now, like he was trying to gain her trust with words that dripped honey. Evelyn remained silent, letting him speak. He would come to her terms soon enough. And when he did, she would be ready. The door swung open suddenly, and the sheriff walked in, the broad, tired shoulders of his uniform instantly familiar. Sheriff Boone looked at her, his face guarded, and then at Pike. A small smile tugged at the corners of his mouth, but there was no warmth in it. Evelyn, Boone said, his voice heavy but not unkind. I see we're getting down to business already. I was just about to close the deal, Evelyn answered smoothly, though her heart was hammering in her chest. The sheriff's presence was a warning to Pike. Boone might not know exactly what she was doing, but he knew enough to stay out of it. Pike didn't flinch. Instead, he spread his hands in mock surrender. Of course, Sheriff. Business is business after all. Can't let opportunities slip away. Boone's eyes never left the two of them as Pike stood and walked over to the counter, pulling out a ledger. He set it down in front of Evelyn. I'll make sure the price is right. You'll find no better deal in the area. Evelyn's fingers skimmed over the papers, though she wasn't reading them. Her mind was elsewhere, watching for the telltale signs, the little slip-ups that might give him away. She could hear Pike's breathing slow, like a predator sensing its prey. A thin, almost imperceptible tremor ran through his hands as he offered her a pen. His eyes darted quickly to the window. Evelyn's gaze followed, and for a split second she caught sight of a figure across the street, standing in the shadow of the livery stable. He was watching, waiting. She didn't need to see his face to know who it was. Cole. He was always there, just out of sight, ready to move if needed. She lifted the pen, pressing it into the paper, but before she signed, she asked the question she already knew the answer to. Who's buying it? Pike's smile faltered for just a moment, but it was enough for Evelyn to see. His hand twitched. He hadn't expected her to ask that. I can't disclose that, Miss Bell, he said quickly, too quickly. Not until the deal is finalized. She lifted an eyebrow, letting the silence stretch between them. She could feel the weight of Cole's presence outside. It was almost as if his patience had settled over her like a cloak, urging her forward. You know, Evelyn said softly, setting the pen down again. You can tell me who's buying this land now, or I'll be forced to go to the marshal's office and tell them about those telegrams you've been sending out. Pike's eyes flickered to the door, his grip on the ledger tightening. His lips pulled into a tight line, but he held it for another moment before he let out a breath, deflating. Elias Mercer, he whispered, his voice barely audible. Evelyn's stomach twisted. She had suspected as much, but hearing the name out loud made it real. She stood, straightening herself. That's all I need to know, Pike. Boone made a move to speak, but she was already walking toward the door. The words felt like ash in her mouth, but she spoke them anyway. Mercer's the one killing our families. She didn't look back to see Pike's reaction. Outside, Cole was still waiting, leaning against a post by the livery. Evelyn walked to him, and as she approached, he pushed off the post and met her halfway. It's Mercer, she said, the weight of the name hanging between them. Cole nodded, the corners of his mouth tightening. I suspected as much. He's been buying up everything he can get his hands on. But this is something bigger than I thought. We have to stop him. Evelyn's voice was steady now. She was done waiting. Cole didn't answer immediately. His eyes swept the street, and she knew what he was doing, assessing, calculating. He turned his gaze back to her, his face unreadable. We will. But first, we need Mercer to make his move, and when he does, we'll be ready. Evelyn felt a rush of adrenaline at his words. Then we find out how he's going to make his move. Cole looked at her closely, his eyes searching. Are you sure you're ready for this? Ready for what it means to take down a man like Mercer? She nodded. I've been ready for a long time. Cole looked at her for a long moment, his face hardening in determination. Then let's make sure this time we're the ones in control. And just like that, the plan shifted into motion. Mercer might have thought Red Hollow was a small, quiet town. But he hadn't counted on the kind of people who called it home. Evelyn, Cole, and Boone, all of them were standing against him now, and they would see him defeated before the sun set on another day. The wind kicked up again as Evelyn and Cole made their way back to the saloon, but the breeze felt different now. It wasn't the heavy, suffocating heat of the morning. Instead, it carried something else, an electric charge, a sense of urgency. The air was thick with it, like the calm before a storm, and Evelyn knew that once Mercer made his move, there would be no turning back. The street outside the saloon was quiet, too quiet. The usual mix of cowboys and merchants had thinned out, replaced by a handful of people moving quickly, keeping their heads down. Word had already begun to spread about the land deal, and Evelyn could see the nervous glances exchanged between the townsfolk. They knew something was coming. They just didn't know what. Inside, Big Tom was leaning against the bar, polishing glasses with the kind of mechanical precision that made Evelyn's skin crawl. She could see the tension in his broad frame, the way his eyes kept flicking toward the door as if he expected someone to burst in at any moment. But he didn't say anything as she and Cole entered, just gave them a quick nod, his face hardening with the knowledge that the quiet days were over. You sure you're ready for this? Cole asked, his voice low, almost lost in the haze of the saloon. Evelyn didn't answer immediately. She just walked to the back of the room, toward the small table where she and Cole had sat too many times, talking strategy, going over the plans that had slowly been taking shape over the last few weeks. She didn't need to be ready. She had no choice but to act. Finally, she turned to face him. If I'm not ready now, I'll never be. Cole nodded, then slipped into the chair across from her, pulling out a crumpled piece of paper from his coat pocket. It was the map they'd stolen from Pike's office, the one with all the markers indicating Mercer's land purchases, his business dealings, and more importantly, the locations of his secret meetings. They'd been piecing together this web for days, and now they were ready to strike. I've got the details on where Mercer's men are holed up, Cole said, his eyes scanning the map with a practiced eye. They'll make their move tonight, that much is certain. The land office is just a front. He's not buying land for farming. He's after the water rights. That's where the real power lies. Evelyn's hand clenched into a fist. So, we stop him before he gets to them. Exactly, Cole replied. But we need to be careful. Mercer's no fool. He's got a lot of men working for him, and some of them are in town already, blending in with the locals. The door to the saloon swung open, and Evelyn's heart skipped a beat as she saw Sheriff Boone step inside, his face grim. He nodded to Cole, then made his way toward the bar. The other patrons moved aside, murmuring under their breath as he passed. Got something? Cole asked quietly, already knowing what Boone had to say. The sheriff took a seat at their table, his eyes scanning the room before settling on Evelyn. Mercer's men are making their move tonight, he said, his voice low but firm. We've got confirmation. They're planning on setting up shop just outside town, waiting for the right moment to strike. We've got to be ready. Evelyn's mind raced. She'd known this was coming. She could feel it in her bones, but hearing it confirmed still made her stomach churn. She wasn't sure if it was fear or something else, but she couldn't afford to focus on that now. Her family's land, the people of Red Hollow, they were all at risk. If Mercer took control, everything they'd fought for would be lost. Boone leaned forward, his eyes meeting hers. You're sure about this, Evelyn? This isn't a game anymore. You've seen what Mercer's men are capable of. She nodded. I've been ready for this for a long time, Sheriff. We have to fight back. For my family, for the town, for everyone who's ever had their land stolen. Good, Boone said, his voice carrying the weight of responsibility. Then we ride at sundown. I'll get the posse together, but we need to move fast. Mercer's not the only one with men in town. There are others watching, too. Evelyn felt the tension in her shoulders as she stood up, taking a deep breath. This was it, the final confrontation. There was no turning back. As the night settled in, the town of Red Hollow seemed to hold its breath. The familiar sounds of boots on dust, the murmur of voices in the streets, the clink of glasses in the saloon, all of it faded away under the weight of what was coming. The horses were saddled and ready. Cole had already gathered the men who would ride with them, a mix of ranchers, farmers, and even a few old lawmen who had seen their share of gunfights. They stood together in the gathering dusk, waiting for the signal. Boone was already making rounds, checking in with the men, ensuring everyone knew their place. Evelyn stood off to the side, her hands resting on the saddle of her mare, Buttercup, her heart racing in her chest. This was her moment. There was no turning back. She had to trust the plan, trust Cole, and trust herself. "Ready?" Cole asked, appearing at her side, his expression unreadable. She looked up at him, her chest tight with anticipation. "Let's do this." The group rode out, heading toward the outskirts of town, where Mercer's men were waiting. As the sun dipped lower behind the mountains, the shadows seemed to stretch longer, like the land itself was holding its breath. They rode in silence, the only sound the steady rhythm of hooves on the earth. Every now and then, Evelyn would glance at Cole, noting the way he held himself, alert, focused, ready. She could feel his presence beside her like a shield, a steady force in the chaos. As they neared the location where Mercer's men were holed up, Evelyn's pulse quickened. The air seemed to thicken, heavy with the weight of what was to come. The landscape ahead was dark, illuminated only by the pale light of the moon. The buildings were darkened, silent, giving off the eerie feeling that something dangerous was about to happen. And then, in an instant, everything changed. Shots rang out, echoing through the night. "Get down!" Cole shouted, yanking her down into the dirt with him as bullets zipped past them. The battle had begun. The first shot shattered the calm of the night like a gunshot to the heart of Red Hollow. Evelyn's instincts kicked in immediately, her body dropping low to the ground as she followed Cole's movement with ease. The sound of hooves pounding against the dirt filled the air, and the frantic rustling of men scrambling to take cover followed quickly. The battle was on, and there would be no more waiting. "Stay down," Cole hissed, pulling her toward the shadow of a nearby building. His hand was steady on her arm, his face set in that grim expression she'd come to know all too well. It was the look of a man who had seen too much violence and had learned how to survive it. Evelyn barely had time to adjust her position before the next shot rang out, kicking up dust where she'd been standing moments before. Her heart raced as she scanned the darkened landscape ahead, looking for any sign of Mercer's men. Her breath was shallow, her mind spinning with adrenaline, but there was no time for fear. "Come on!" Cole shouted, rising to his feet, his gun drawn. He moved swiftly, the shadows swallowing him as he dashed toward the next piece of cover. Evelyn followed, her own gun ready, her pulse matching the rhythm of her footsteps. The first wave of Mercer's men came charging toward them, bullets flying through the night, striking the ground and buildings in a chaotic spray. But Evelyn had learned quickly in the last few weeks. She was no stranger to battle. Her father's lessons came flooding back, the rhythm of breathing, the steady aim of her gun, the way to make every shot count. "Stay close," Cole barked, his voice fierce but carrying an undertone of something else, a protective instinct, something that went beyond their partnership. He knew, as she did, that once they were in the thick of it, nothing could be left to chance. Evelyn glanced to her right and saw Sheriff Boone, his badge gleaming under the moonlight, leading a small group of men into position. His usual calm demeanor had given way to something more aggressive, more hardened. He was no longer just the sheriff of Red Hollow. Now, he was part of this fight, the same as everyone else. Evelyn pushed forward, keeping pace with Cole as they advanced, their path determined by the gunfire and the shadows. They reached a cluster of abandoned buildings that Cole had identified earlier, where Mercer's men were holed up. Evelyn could hear the sounds of voices, shouting, and the clinking of weapons as the outlaws prepared for the next assault. 3 at the door, Cole muttered, eyes scanning the area ahead. We take the left flank, you cover the right. Evelyn nodded, her mind working quickly. She knew what needed to be done, the stakes clearer than ever. Her family had fought for this land, for this life. And now she was going to take it back piece by piece. She moved quickly into position, the soft scrape of her boots on the dirt the only sound she made. Her gun was steady in her hand, her aim trained on the men who thought they could take what didn't belong to them. On my mark, Cole whispered, his voice low and steady despite the chaos. He looked at her, his eyes meeting hers for just a moment, a glance that said everything. And then he was moving, sprinting toward the target, his gun barking loudly as he fired at the first man who stepped into his line of sight. Evelyn didn't hesitate. She took her shot, her bullet finding its mark, and another one of Mercer's men dropped to the ground. The others scattered, taking cover behind anything they could find, but Cole was relentless. He moved like a shadow, his gun never faltering, his aim true. Evelyn couldn't help but feel a rush of pride as she followed him, her shots precise, her movements calculated. For a moment everything felt clear, the years of waiting, of watching, of planning, it was all leading to this. And in that moment she knew that there was no going back. Clear. Cole shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. Move forward. Evelyn followed, her heart still pounding but now with a steady beat. They advanced together, weaving between cover, never giving the enemy a chance to regroup. Another shot rang out from behind them, and Evelyn turned to see Sheriff Boone take down another man, his rifle raised with steady hands. Mercer's men were falling, one by one, their confidence crumbling as the town rose up against them. The fight was far from over, but it was becoming clear that this was no longer a battle they could win. The last of Mercer's men, the ones who had been left to cover their retreat, turned and fled, their guns still firing wildly as they tried to escape into the night. But they were outnumbered, outgunned, and outclassed. The fight had already been decided. Cole motioned for the others to hold back as they approached the center of town, where Mercer's men had been stationed. The town was quiet now, save for the sound of boots on dirt and the soft whistle of the wind. The fight was over, but the cost had been high. Evelyn walked beside Cole, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind the weight of what they had done. But it wasn't just the battle they had fought in the streets that weighed on her. It was the war that had been going on in her heart, the one she had been fighting for so long. She looked up at Cole, her thoughts swirling. "We did it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not yet," he replied, his tone flat. "We still have Mercer to deal with." Evelyn nodded. She had known this moment was coming. She had known that taking back the land, taking back what was hers, wouldn't be easy, but she was ready. As they approached the center of town, she saw the carriage, the same one Mercer had arrived in earlier, parked near the saloon. The door was open, and inside Mercer was sitting, his hands bound and his face pale. His eyes flickered up as they approached, and for the first time Evelyn saw fear in them. "You thought you could take everything," she said, her voice steady, "but you were wrong." Mercer sneered, though it lacked conviction. "You won't get away with this. You're nothing but a girl playing in a man's game." Evelyn stepped forward, her gun drawn, and pointed it squarely at his chest. "I'm not a girl anymore, Mercer," she said, her voice cold and final. "And this is one game you're not going to win." Cole moved to stand beside her, his presence steady, unwavering. "It's over, Mercer. The land is free, and so are the people of Red Hollow." Mercer's face twisted with rage, but there was nothing he could do now. His empire of lies had crumbled, and his future was as bleak as the desert that surrounded them. As the sheriff approached to take Mercer into custody, Evelyn turned to Cole, her heart racing. For the first time in years, she felt something else rising within her, something that wasn't fueled by vengeance. Hope, purpose. And when she looked at Cole, she knew she wasn't alone anymore. He had been her partner in this fight, just as he would be in everything that came after. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot, but Evelyn was no longer just surviving. She was living, and for the first time in a long while, she could see the light at the end of the tunnel.